Ancient Egyptian civilization coalesced around 3150 BC with the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first king of the first dynasty, Narmer. Predominantly native Egyptian rule lasted until the conquest by the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BC. In 332 BC, Macedonian ruler Alexander the Great conquered Egypt as he toppled the Achaemenids and established the short-lived Macedonian Empire, which gave rise to the Hellenistic Ptolemaic kingdom, founded in 305 BC by one of Alexander's former generals, Ptolemy Isoter. The Ptolemies had to fight native rebellions and were involved in foreign and civil wars that led to the decline of the kingdom and its final annexation by Rome. The death of Cleopatra ended the nominal independence of Egypt, resulting in Egypt's becoming one of the provinces of the Roman Empire. Roman rule in Egypt, including Byzantine, lasted from 30 BC to 641 AD, with a brief interlude of control by the Sasanian Empire between 619 and 629. Known as Sasanian Egypt. 1. After the Muslim conquest of Egypt, parts of Egypt became provinces of successive caliphates and other Muslim dynasties. Rashidun Caliphate, 632 to 661, Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750, Abbasid Caliphate, 750 to 935, Fatimid Caliphate, 909 to 1171, Ayyubid Sultanate, 1171 to 1260, and the Mamluk Sultanate, 1250 to 1517. In 1517, Ottoman Sultan Selim I captured Cairo, absorbing Egypt into the Ottoman Empire. Egypt remained entirely Ottoman until 1805, except during French occupation from 1798 to 1801-2. Starting in 1867, Egypt became a nominally autonomous tributary state called the Khedivate of Egypt. However, Khedivate Egypt fell under British control in 1882 following the Anglo-Egyptian War. After the end of World War I and following the Egyptian Revolution of 1919, the Kingdom of Egypt was established. While a de jure independent state, the United Kingdom retained control over foreign affairs, defense, and other matters. British occupation lasted until 1954, with the Anglo-Egyptian Agreement of 1954. The modern Republic of Egypt was founded in 1953, and with the complete withdrawal of British forces from the Suez Canal in 1956, President Gamal Abdel Nasser, president from 1956 to 1970, introduced many reforms and created the short-lived United Arab Republic, with Syria. His terms also saw the Six-Day War and the creation of the International Non-Aligned Movement. His successor, Anwar Sadat, president from 1970 to 1981, changed Egypt's trajectory, departing from many of the political and economic tenets of Nasserism, reinstituting a multi-party system and launching the Infita economic policy. He led Egypt in the Yom Kippur War of 1973 to regain Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, which Israel had occupied since the Six-Day War of 1967. This later led to the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. Recent Egyptian history has been dominated by events following nearly 30 years of rule by the former President Hosni Mubarak. The Egyptian Revolution of 2011 deposed Mubarak and resulted in the first democratically elected president in Egyptian history, Mohamed Morsi. Unrest after the 2011 revolution and related disputes led to the 2013 Egyptian coup d'état, Morsi's imprisonment and the election of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as president in 2014. The Ptolemaic Kingdom was a powerful Hellenistic state extending from southern Syria in the east, to Siron to the west, and south to the frontier with Nubia. Alexandria became the capital city and a center of Greek culture and trade. To gain recognition by the native Egyptian populace, they named themselves as the successors to the pharaohs. The later Ptolemies took on Egyptian traditions, had themselves portrayed on public monuments in Egyptian style and dress, and participated in Egyptian religious life. 1314. The last ruler from the Ptolemaic dynasty was Cleopatra, who committed suicide following the burial of her lover Mark Antony, who had died in her arms, from a self-inflicted stab wound, after Augustus had captured Alexandria and her mercenary forces had fled. The Ptolemies faced rebellions of native Egyptians, often caused by an unwanted regime, and were involved in foreign and civil wars that led to the decline of the kingdom and its annexation by Rome. Nevertheless, Hellenistic culture continued to thrive in Egypt well after the Muslim conquest. The native Egyptian, Coptic culture continued to exist as well. The Coptic language itself was Egypt's most widely spoken language until at least the 10th century. The Byzantines were able to regain control of the country after a brief Persian invasion early in the 7th century, until 639 to 642, when Egypt was invaded and conquered by the Arab Islamic Empire. The final loss of Egypt was of incalculable significance to the Byzantine Empire, which had relied on Egypt for many agricultural and manufactured goods. When they defeated the Byzantine armies in Egypt, the Arabs brought Sunni Islam to the country. Early in this period, Egyptians began to blend their new faith with their Christian traditions as well as other indigenous beliefs and practices, leading to various Sufi orders that have flourished to this day. 17. These earlier rites had survived the period of Coptic Christianity. 21. Muslim rulers nominated by the Islamic Caliphate remained in control of Egypt for the next 6 centuries, with Cairo as the seat of the Caliphate under the Fatimids. With the end of the Kurdish Ayyubid dynasty, the Mamluks, a Turco-Circassian military caste, took control about AD 1250. By the late 13th century, Egypt linked the Red Sea, India, Malaya, and East Indies. 22. The Greek and Coptic languages and cultures went into a steep decline in favor of Arabic culture, though Coptic managed to last as a spoken language until the 17th century and remains a liturgical language today. The Mamluks continued to govern the country until the conquest of Egypt by the Ottoman Turks in 1517, after which it became a province of the Ottoman Empire. The mid-14th century Black Death killed about 40% of the population of Egypt. After the 15th century, the Ottoman invasion pushed the Egyptian system into decline. The defensive militarization damaged its civil society and economic institutions. 22. The weakening of the economic system combined with the effects of the plague left Egypt vulnerable to foreign invasion. Portuguese traders took over their trade. 22. Egypt suffered 6 famines between 1687 and 1731. 24. The 1784 famine cost it roughly 1/6 of its population. 25. The brief French invasion of Egypt led by Napoleon Bonaparte began in 1798. The campaign eventually led to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, creating the field of Egyptology. Despite early victories and an initially successful expedition into Syria, Napoleon and his Armée d'Orient were eventually defeated and forced to withdraw, especially after suffering the defeat of the supporting French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. The expulsion of the French in 1801 by Ottoman, Mamluk, and British forces was followed by 4 years of anarchy in which Ottomans, Mamluks, and Albanians, who were nominally in the service of the Ottomans, wrestled for power. Out of this chaos, the commander of the Albanian regiment, Muhammad Ali, Kavalali Mehmed Ali Pasha, emerged as a dominant figure and in 1805 was acknowledged by the Sultan in Istanbul as his viceroy in Egypt. The title implied subordination to the Sultan, but this was in fact a polite fiction. Ottoman power in Egypt was finished and Muhammad Ali, an ambitious and able leader, established a dynasty that was to rule Egypt until the revolution of 1952. After 1882 the dynasty became a British puppet. 26. Muhammad Ali's primary focus was military. He annexed northern Sudan, 1820 to 1824, Syria, 1833, and parts of Arabia and Anatolia. But in 1841 the European powers, fearful lest he topple the Ottoman Empire itself, forced him to return most of his conquests to the Ottomans. He kept the Sudan and his title to Egypt was made hereditary. A more lasting result of his military ambition is that it required him to modernize the country. Eager to adopt the military, and therefore industrial, techniques of the great powers, he sent students to the West and invited training missions to Egypt. He built industries, a system of canals for irrigation and transport, and reformed the civil service. 27. The introduction in 1820 of long staple cotton, the Egyptian variety of which became notable, transformed its agriculture into a cash crop monoculture before the end of the century. The social effects of this were enormous. Land ownership became concentrated and many foreigners arrived, shifting production towards international markets. 27. British indirect rule lasted from 1882, when the British succeeded in defeating the Egyptian army at Tel el-Keba in September and took control of the country, to the 1952 Egyptian Revolution, which made Egypt a republic, and when British advisors were expelled. Muhammad Ali was succeeded briefly by his son Ibrahim, in September 1848, then by grandson Abbas I, in November 1848, then by Said, in 1854, and Ismail Illinois, in 1863. Abbas I was cautious. Said and Ismail were ambitious developers, but they spent beyond their means. The Suez Canal, built in partnership with the French, was completed in 1869. The cost of this and other projects had two effects: it led to enormous debt to European banks, and caused popular discontent because of the onerous taxation it required. In 1875, Ismail sold Egypt's 44% share in the canal to the British government. Ismail also tried to conquer the Ethiopian Empire and was defeated twice at Gundit in 1875 and again at the Battle of Gura in 1876. Within 3 years this led to the imposition of British and French controllers who sat in the Egyptian cabinet, and, with the financial power of the bondholders behind them, were the real power in the government. Local dissatisfaction with Ismail and with European intrusion led to the formation of the first nationalist groupings in 1879, with Ahmed Urabi a prominent figure. In 1882 he became head of a nationalist-dominated ministry committed to democratic reforms including parliamentary control of the budget. Fearing a reduction of their control, Britain and France intervened militarily, bombarding Alexandria and crushing the Egyptian army at the Battle of Tel el-Keba. 29. They reinstalled Ismail's son Tewfik as the figurehead of a de facto British protectorate. 30. 31. In 1914, the protectorate was made official, and the Ottoman Empire no longer had a role. The title for the head of state, which in 1867 had changed from Pasha to Khedive, was changed again to Sultan. Abbas II was deposed as Khedive and replaced by his uncle, Hussein Kamal, a sultan. 32. In 1906, the Dinshaway incident prompted many neutral Egyptians to join the nationalist movement. After the First World War, Saad Zaghloul and the Wafd Party led the Egyptian nationalist movement to a majority at the local legislative assembly. When the British exiled Zaghloul and his associates to Malta on 8 March 1919, the country arose in its first modern revolution. The revolt led the UK government to issue a unilateral declaration of Egypt's independence on 22 February 1922, 33. The new government drafted and implemented a constitution in 1923 based on a parliamentary system. Saad Zaghloul was popularly elected as Prime Minister of Egypt in 1924. In 1936, the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty was concluded. Continued instability due to remaining British influence and increasing political involvement by the king led to the dissolution of the parliament in a military coup d'état known as the 1952 Revolution. The Free Officers Movement forced King Farouk to abdicate in support of his son Fuad. British military presence in Egypt lasted until 1954. It is all for today. PLS subscribe, and if you want I will release an part 2 on modern history of Egypt.